The city of Los Sueños is like no other. Built on ancient bones and smothered in modern ruin, it's a city where time folds in on itself, where the ghosts of the past walk along the monsters of the present. The sidewalks are cracked and the buildings are decayed. The air stinks of rot and the streets are lined with tents. And crime isn't just rising, it's boiling over. This is daily life for the city of Los Sueños. Since I began covering Ready or Not a little over 2 years ago, much has changed about what we know about the city and its people. So today I felt the need to go back and update my original video to account for all the new information we have about the city of Los Sueños. But before we talk about the present, we must first discuss the past. Long before skyscrapers, SWAT raids, or collapsing institutions, Los Sueños was a place of ancient memory. According to the book Mesoamerican Ancient Cultures, The Great Storm, this region was once a refuge for survivors of a cataclysmic event that struck ancient Mesoamerica. The details are lost to time, but the oral histories speak of widespread drought, disease, crop failure, and death. This great storm shattered countless civilizations. Seeking survival, many of these ancient peoples migrated north, eventually settling in the area that would become Los Sueños. It's said their descendants still remain even in modern day, carrying the traditions of those who endured the collapse. What's even more interesting is that hundreds of years later, their art depicting said storm can still be found in the area in various ancient tunnels all over the Los Sueños area. While we don't know exactly when Los Sueños was founded, we can infer a few details based on reality. If it isn't obvious, Los Sueños is a fictional city inspired by Los Angeles, but a much darker reflection, if that's even possible. This is LA if it was gutted, starved, and set on fire, well, set more on fire than it already constantly is. Think broken sidewalks, tents on every corner, and people fighting just to survive, and it really seems like I'm just describing real-world LA, so let's just move on to the origins of the city. As I said, since it's so close to the real-world LA, we can assume it was likely founded sometime in the 1780s, and for its early life, it wasn't always necessarily falling apart. Yet things began to rapidly change in the mid-1800s. In 1855, 3 outlaws, Frankie Wilfred, Jack Newman, and Abraham Nelson, tore across California, pulling off a string of high-risk bank robberies over 6 brutal months. While their notoriety was unmatched, their luck didn't last forever. In the heart of Los Sueños, the 3 celebrated their success at the Clemente Hotel. Due to a local tip, the U.S. Marshals zeroed in on their location, surrounding the hotel and forcing their way in. What followed was a 30-minute shootout that shredded the lobby and upper floors. In the end, all 3 outlaws died. But their legend lived on, as for years to come, the firearms used in that shootout were put on display in the hotel lobby, not as a cautionary relic, but more so as a tourist attraction. This was the first major incident that really painted the city as something more than just another frontier settlement. It gave Los Sueños a reputation, a taste for chaos, violence, and infamy. The blood on the hotel floor dried, but the city's thirst for conflict never really did. In many ways, this shootout marked the beginning of a long, violent relationship between Los Sueños and the concept of law and order. In the years that followed, Los Sueños started booming. In 1866, the first transcontinental railroad connected the east and the west coasts. Just a year later, Los Sueños opened its first train station, tying the city into a growing national network. In 1888, gold was discovered in nearby rivers, igniting a massive population surge. By 1892, the station and railway were expanded to handle the influx. But growth came with disaster. A deadly train crash in 1898 shut the station down, yet repairs brought in new safety protocols, and by 1903 the station pivoted from passengers to freight driven by the industrial boom, and the station was redesigned by famed architect Clarence Smith, giving Los Sueños' Union Station its iconic look. By 1985, demand dwindled, and one wing of Los Sueños' Union Station was earmarked for cultural preservation, and by 1998, the Los Sueños Railroad Museum was opened. Following this, it's unknown when the station was co-opted by the LSPD, but due to funding cuts and a disintegrating police station they were previously stationed in, the LSPD set up shop in the remains of the Los Sueños Union Station. Before we get into more modern-day developments in the city, it is worth mentioning the heroics of H. Lincoln. As an element leader for D Platoon, Lincoln spent over 12 years in the LSPD SWAT, leading countless high-risk operations across the county. In the late 90s, his reputation was cemented during the infamous LSX airport siege, where his team faced off against heavily armored members of the People's Liberation Party barricaded inside the LSX tower. Lincoln personally neutralized 4 militants, one of whom was preparing to fire a guided missile at a passenger jet, a move that saved hundreds of lives. For this, Lincoln received his first Medal of Valor. Not long after, Lincoln led an assault on Los Suenos' city hall, where the Sovereign America militia had planted a portable nuclear device. A brutal firefight erupted across floors 24 to 27, with Lincoln captured on live television making entry. In just 20 minutes, 6 of the 10 suspects were killed, 4 arrested, and every hostage rescued, including the apprehension of their leader, Tobias Strom. For this, Lincoln received his second Medal of Valor and was honored by the 43rd President of the United States. Now, a quick aside, while not Los Suenos lore specific, it is worth mentioning the political status of the United States. We don't know who the 43rd President actually is, and while it very well could be George W. Bush, when Ready or Not starts in 2025, a magazine mentions America's 52nd president. If you didn't know, in 2025, the US is on president number 47. So something occurred in the US that expedited the terms of at least 5 presidents. We don't know what that was, but it is still worth mentioning. Anyway, as we move into more modern-day Los Suenos, things begin to pick up quite a lot. Beginning in 2020, Los Suenos began choking on a 5-year drought. Wildfires raged across the countryside, water became scarce, protests have erupted in nearby Tijuana, and violence has broken out on the Tecate border, bleeding into Los Suenos itself, resulting in the so-called immigration wars and ICE funding tripling. This is also another good point to mention that despite being LA, Los Suenos, geographically speaking, is actually where San Diego should be, placing it right on the US-Mexico border, explaining how these protests have been able to affect Los Suenos so deeply. Moving into the city itself, Los Suenos is in the middle of a sanitation strike, which began sometime around early 2025 due to the city not increasing wages. As we explore the city and play through various operations, we can see the effects of this strike are massive. Garbage has piled up everywhere, streets, alleys, parks, everything is covered in garbage. The smell is overwhelming, as you could imagine, and disease is slowly infecting not just the streets, but the water itself. Meanwhile, DeBanco Security Services, the city's premier armored bank transport service, is also on strike. They are refusing to move money without better working conditions after a string of robberies resulted in many of their employees being killed. And the result is that no one is refilling ATMs anymore or even transporting cash, causing people to not be able to access their own money and beginning an economic gridlock, pushing various people into desperation. And if the economic gridlocks, strikes, and institutional rot weren't enough, Los Suenos is also facing a worsening energy crisis, a slow burn that's been destabilizing the city for nearly a decade. Around 2017, a hydroelectric dam supplying a significant portion of the city's power was condemned following a terrorist attack by an unknown group. Assuming Los Suenos mirrors LA, that dam represents nearly 16% of the city's power supply. Losing that output for nearly 8 years has strained the grid to a breaking point. To make matters worse, one of the city's key energy providers, a natural gas giant called Blue Fuel, is now running out of reserves. The company once powered a massive chunk of the city, but today, their supply is near depletion. The result? Frequent blackouts, power outages ripple across neighborhoods, killing traffic systems, disrupting communications, and leaving entire city blocks in darkness. In a city already teetering on the edge, no power means no security, no services, and no stability. While there has been a push for offshore drilling operations to combat this crisis, the damage has already been done. And to top it all off, the state had the gall to propose and pass a war vet funding cut. They gutted financial support for veterans, presumably to funnel the funds into their own pockets. No explanation, no redirection, just another group abandoned right in the middle of all of this, forcing several vets into committing criminal activities. Just as a string of terrorist attacks began to hit the city after US airstrikes in northern Yemen pushed a terrorist cell to retaliate in Los Suenos specifically. As all of this chaos continues, the LSPD are supposed to be the ones to protect the citizens from it all. However, in 2020, the Los Suenos Police Department was then severely defunded. The result? A skeleton crew of a police department that, despite lacking resources and literally everything else, are completely overstocked in guns, equipment, and ammunition. Basically, the LSPD is overarmed and underfunded. Or in a more poetic sense, they're outfitted for war in a city that already looks like a battlefield. And if the city didn't look rough enough, In February of 2026, the Category 5 Hurricane Antonio made landfall in Los Sueños, causing widespread destruction. For reference, in recorded history, Category 5 hurricanes are staggeringly rare. And when they do strike, they are absolutely catastrophic. A Category 5 is the highest rating on the Saffir-Simpson scale, reserved only for storms with sustained winds exceeding 157 miles per hour. These are not storms you ride out. They're events you survive if you're lucky. To put it into perspective, out of the hundreds of named hurricanes that have formed over the past century, only a few have ever made landfall at Category 5 strength in the continental US. Hurricanes like Andrew, Katrina, and Michael caused tens of billions in damage without directly hitting major urban centers at peak strength. Now imagine something powerful slamming directly into a dense, unstable, and already crumbling metropolis like Los Sueños. A city just doesn't recover from that. And that is the most recent devastating event to occur in the timeline, but there is still further disaster to come. While we haven't seen the effects quite yet, by 2028, Los Sueños plans on rolling out the Safer Cities program, a sweeping initiative that claims to reduce crime, but in reality expands surveillance, force, and preemptive control. At the core of the program is widespread surveillance, giving officers real-time access to facial and fingerprint recognition tech tied to statewide databases. The program also grants broader legal protection for the use of lethal force, lowering the threshold for what qualifies as an imminent threat during so-called high-stakes scenarios. Police chiefs now have emergency powers, allowing them to impose citywide curfews and request preemptive search warrants during times of quote-unquote heightened tension. In so-called high-risk neighborhoods, stop-and-frisk tactics are expanding, alongside the deployment of protective policing technology that uses historical crime data to predict future offenses, which is basically the plot of the Minority Report, so it looks like the LSPD are about to get some precogs pretty soon. We also know that due to this Safer Cities program, the LSPD will finally be receiving a major funding boost, with upgrades to equipment, more body cameras, and promises of community outreach, though that's clearly more of a PR checkbox than a priority. And perhaps the most interesting aspect of this program is that the LSPD is now partnered with military branches in joint task forces aimed at targeting high-risk crimes, a scenario we've already seen played out with the joint LSPD coast raid on the Heavywell oil rig in October of 2027. So, if it is not abundantly clear, Los Sueños is slowly becoming a police state, so to speak. The real question is then, why did it happen and what does it mean? From its very inception, Los Sueños is established as a land chosen by survivors of a collapse, a place steeped in death, drought, and depression. That kind of legacy matters. The city was never built on solid ground, culturally, historically, or literally. The early violence of the outlaw shootout isn't just backstory, it's kind of like a thesis statement. That bloodshed and spectacle are embedded in the city's identity. It didn't urbanize into chaos, it industrialized into its own dysfunction. It romanticized violence, commodified collapse, and treated tragedy as tourism. From the rail boom to the energy crisis, everything Los Sueños builds eventually self-destructs. Progress in Los Sueños is a circular lie. Nothing improves, it just decays in new and innovative ways. Every civic institution turns into a new face of authoritarianism, control, or neglect. I mean, just look at the train station. Train station becomes a museum. Museum becomes a police station. Police station becomes a militarized bunker. This is a city where catastrophe is not a deviation, it's the norm. The only reason Hurricane Antonio hits so hard is because everything else was already broken. It doesn't even feel like the worst thing to happen, just the most cinematic. And it is really interesting to learn about this great storm in the past and watch how closely it mirrors modern day. The same thing is happening. Drought, disease, crop failure, fire, and a literal great storm. This is not just a coincidence, it's mythological recursion. The same pattern that broke civilizations thousands of years ago is repeating itself, almost note for note. It's like the past is bleeding into the present. Like I said, time is folding in on itself, and the storm came back to finish what it started. In terms of the city itself, what we're looking at isn't chaos, it's kind of like managed decline. A city allowed to rot just enough to justify militarized responses, all the while maintaining the illusion of civic order. Los Sueños didn't stumble into crisis, and if you really think about it, every crisis serves a purpose. The sanitation strike makes the streets visibly unlivable, visually and physically justifying an escalation in force. The energy collapse destabilized basic routines, turning power and water into luxuries, which creates panic and dependency. The Debanco strike and economic freeze force people into desperation, increasing visible crime and eroding public trust in civil order. And the Safer Cities program isn't a response to these problems, it's the goal they enabled. This is how modern authoritarianism grows. It doesn't need to manufacture enemies, it just lets existing systems fail, then steps in with a boot and a smile. It almost feels like there's a shadow organization behind the scenes, facilitating all the chaos and destruction just to justify some kind of end goal. But that's crazy, right? Right?